A couple of summers ago, our family was camping on an island up in the Boundary Waters. I've shared stories before. Our family does a little of this camping business, and we spent several days on this island. And if you've been to the Boundary Waters before, you know a few things about each campsite that the Forest Service, they have set up there. The Forest Service has created at each campsite in the Boundary Waters a spot for your tent, which is a good thing. They've also created a sort of a fire ring where you're supposed to have your designated fire there, and that comes with a grate. But they also, every campsite also has a trail, a path that's leading away from the campsite to the all-important outdoor latrine. This is not a sermon about latrines, okay? Well, a couple of days into our little adventure on this island, we were sitting there playing games, and one of my boys, he started talking about these beautiful or pretty flowers, he called them. There are these pretty flowers that he'd seen, and he was wondering what kind of flowers they were because he'd never seen these flowers before. And I said to him, well, where are they? And he said, Dad, if you have kids and you're a dad, you've heard that before. Everybody do that. 1, 2, 3. Right? Dad, it's right there by the path. You know, the path to the latrine. How could you miss it? He said. And that's when we got up and we went to take a look to see the spot where there was this little opening in the trees, and there grew the most beautiful little patch of lady slippers. It was beautiful. This right there, and it was not 2 feet from the path. I'd taken that trail multiple times a day for the last several days, and I hadn't even seen it. I'd missed it. Well, folks, in life, this has me thinking, there are all kinds of things that are easy to miss as we go flying through life. Earlier this week, I was talking with a group about this and about how we miss things in life. And a woman said, oh yeah, Hans, kind of like my garage door. I'm like, what do you mean your garage door? She said, well, I hopped in the car the other day, started the car, mindlessly threw it in reverse and went barreling into my garage door. Apparently, she said, garage doors are easy to miss. There are things that are easy to miss. Moments in our kids' lives, for example. There's that one ingredient we left out of the recipe. If you've built a home, there are all kinds of details, things that are easy to miss. Guys, your anniversary. It's easy to miss. Your wife's birthday. No, I haven't. Maybe I have. Okay? Well, here's the deal. When it comes to the Bible and the violence, today's theme is violence in the Bible. When it comes to the violence that comes in so many of the stories in the Bible, there's a detail that I think is easy to miss that occurs in those Bible stories that appear to be so awfully violent. Stories that make God seem all too barbaric and prehistoric and even vengeful. And to get at this detail tonight, that's so easy to miss, we have to step back. We have to go back into that ancient biblical world. Does anyone remember the movie Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure? Anybody? One person, oh my goodness, that was a terrible analogy. How about this? Back to the Future. Do you remember that movie? Okay. So we're going to get into Doc Brown's DeLorean, and we're going to go back in time, back to that prehistoric world, not prehistoric, but that ancient world that the Old and New Testament comes out of. And in that Old Testament world, especially, your tribe, the people you lived with, they meant everything to you. Your tribe was where defined where you belonged. It was all about family. It was your bloodline. It was your lifeline. Your tribe's identity was your identity. If you did something shameful or embarrassing, it reflected poorly on your tribe. Your tribe was your everything. And in that world, tribes constantly were doing battle with one another. Tribes would ransack other tribes, all in the name of preserving their own tribe. And when you'd win a battle over another tribe, your tribe would take out the entire other tribe. You'd take their weapons, you'd take their food, you'd take their tools and their women and their animals, because if you didn't, they might regroup and get revenge. You had to wipe them off the map. This is why in the Old Testament we hear how so-and-so accumulated so many men and this many swords and that many horses and made this and that alliance with this and that tribe. It was life or death, kill or be killed. That was what the world was like. You were always one battle from being crushed. Your tribe was your protection. And regardless of what tribe you were in, before going to battle in that ancient world, you would make a sacrifice to your God. You see, each and every tribe had their own god or goddess that they worshiped, a god you believed would protect you as you went off to battle. And so you would make a sacrifice to keep that God happy, to keep God on your side, so that God would give your tribe protection. And likewise, after victory, you would again make another sacrifice to give thanks to your God for keeping you alive. You always wanted to keep your God happy, because when you went to battle, you wanted to make sure God was fully on your side. So if we were to go back into that ancient world, we'd find that it was a brutal and violent and primitive and barbaric world. So given this picture of what ordinary life was like in that ancient world, it's not all that surprising that the Bible is filled with some pretty violent images, because the Bible reflects real life. And it's not all that surprising that, say, when a tribe won a battle in the Bible, the people gave credit to God. And it's not all that surprising that when they wiped out all the people in that tribe, they said God told them to do it. And it's not all that surprising when this or that tribe put the other tribe to the sword, they did it and said it was under God's power, because that's how people understood the gods to work. Now here, I should say before we go any further, if you don't find this and all the violent stories in the Bible awfully confusing, offensive, or troubling, something is wrong with you, all right? There are people who read these stories and they say, well, that's just how God is. They are very, very warped and dangerous people. Stay away from them. Think about it. In the history of our country, people have used violent Bible stories to justify the killing of Native Americans and the apartheid in South Africa and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Christians have used Bible stories to justify slavery and the Holocaust. In Charlottesville, Christians claim God created humanity with a natural order that justifies all kinds of prejudice and violence against all those who are not white. These sorts of views are absolutely wrong, because they have God, this God of ours, mixed up with those other gods of that ancient world. And these views miss a little detail that occurs in each and every one of the violent stories in the Bible. It's a detail that's absolutely key to understanding this God of ours, and we miss it again and again. You see, folks, the violence in the Bible isn't all that surprising, given the times in which they were written. But what would have been surprising, very surprising to those first readers of the Bible, is that among all that violence, there was something new that was going on. Yes, it was something that was easy to miss, but it was important. The Bible spoke of a God that was doing something new. You see, folks, the Bible records how the people of that nasty ancient world started writing about this new God. And what's easy for us to miss amid all the violence is that this new God was starting a new tribe, if you will. One that would exist not just for its own preservation, but for a higher purpose. A tribe that wouldn't destroy, but would exist to bless all the other tribes of the world. Now we're going to read a story today that's often portrayed as one of the absolute most, I hate to use this word, but repulsive stories in the Bible. It's a story of a father, it appears, who is asked by God to sacrifice his son, to show his devotion and his allegiance to God. It's a story you may have heard about. It's Abraham and Isaac. Now, whether you're familiar with this story or not, a story like this should have us ask, what kind of a sick, twisted, violent God would ask a man to sacrifice his son to show his faithfulness? Well, let's read the story today. Let's put it on the screen here. And you can join me in the parts that are highlighted here. After these things, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. He said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I shall show you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. He cut the wood for the burnt offering and set out and went to the place in the distance that God showed him. We're going to stop there for a second. So already there's a lot that's just wrong in this story. First, God is asking Abraham to sacrifice his son. And if that isn't troubling enough, Abraham, did you notice? Abraham doesn't even argue with God about it. He doesn't even protest. Now, sometimes this story has been used as a story that teaches us to have this type of obedience to God, the obedience of Abraham. But if you ask me, that's kind of sick. What kind of a God would make that kind of a request? So what do we do with this story thus far? Well, we could remember in that ancient world, in order to keep yourself safe, you had to keep the gods happy, right? You had to make sure your God was on the side of your tribe. And how did you keep the gods on your side? Well, you made a sacrifice. You'd set aside a portion of your harvest and offer it on an altar to God. You'd make an offering. Now, what if you made an offering to that God, but your animals got sick, or your neighbor's tribe came through and ransacked your village? Your obvious conclusion way back when would have been you didn't offer enough to your God. So you'd offer more. And you'd offer more and more because the gods were angry and they were demanding. And so if you offered grain and that didn't work, you'd offer a dove. And if the dove didn't work, you'd offer a goat. And if the goat didn't work, you'd offer a cow or 2 cows or an ox or whatever it might be. And if none of these offerings seemed to work, what's the most valuable thing you could offer your God to show how devoted you were to your God? Your child, right? So when God tells Abraham to offer his son in that ancient world, if you notice, Abraham isn't shocked. He just does it. He doesn't protest. Because that's how Abraham and all those of that ancient world understood the world work. God's demanded what was most valuable. It's crazy. It's repulsive. But it's how people saw things in that world. But the story goes on. It says in verse 5, then Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you. Did you catch what Abraham said there? It's a little detail we easily miss. He said, guys, stay here with the donkey. The boy and I are going to go over there. We're going to worship. And then who's going to come back? We, right? We will come back. And when those ancient readers would have heard that line, they would have said, wait a minute. What's this all about? We will come back? There is no we about it. Only Abraham is coming back. Their God's going to take that boy. We nothing. And they would have read on. Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on his son Isaac. And he himself carried fire and the knife. So the two of them walked on together. Isaac said to his father Abraham, "Father." And he said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "The fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" Abraham said, help me here, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." So the two of them walked on together. And folks, at this point, those ancient readers, they would have said, wait a minute, what's this about? The boy is the offering. Gods don't provide offerings. And then they would have kept reading. When they came to the place that God had shown him, Abraham built an altar there and laid the wood in order. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to kill his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am." He said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now on I know you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." And Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. Flabbergasted, you guys. Those ancient people would have said, this isn't like any God we've heard of. Stop a sacrifice? That's unheard of. A God providing the sacrifice? That's impossible. But the story doesn't end there. If that's not enough, an angel shows up. It says, the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, "By myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will indeed bless you, and I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore, and your offspring shall possess the gate of their enemies." And again, those ancient people would have said, this isn't like any God we've ever heard of before. Gods don't bless. Gods demand. And then the angels said to Abraham, if that wasn't all enough, they said, "And Abraham," help me here, "by your offspring shall all the nations of the earth gain blessing for themselves, because you have obeyed my voice." Folks, the image of God asking a father to sacrifice his son should be repulsive to every one of us. But it's right there amongst that request, a violent request that everybody expected, that this God did something totally new. What kind of a God would ask a man to sacrifice his son? The story suggests not this one. The other gods demand your firstborn, but not this one. No way. This God stopped the sacrifice. This God doesn't want your sacrifice. This God is doing something totally new. This God doesn't take. This God provides. This would have blown those ancient people's minds. This would have been groundbreaking, unheard of. We've never heard of a God like this. And not only that, God tells Abraham this is just the beginning. God's going to bless Abraham with love and favor so that through Abraham, everyone on the earth is going to be blessed. God's not angry. God's not demanding. This God wants to bless everybody. Not just those who love, obey, offer sacrifices. This God's going to bless all people everywhere. And folks, this happens again and again and again. Amid the violence of that ancient world we hear about in the Bible, God was again and again attempting to do something new. Take, for example, another story that I think everybody knows, whether you've been around church or not, the story of Noah and the flood, right? If you grew up in church, you were taught how Noah faithfully built that ark, right? He was a model of obedience, and how all those cute animals, 2 by 2, in orderly fashion, filed into that big boat, right? But if you step back for a minute and think about the story of the flood, it's an incredibly violent story. Why did Noah build the boat? I think he was scared out of his mind. He'll do anything because God's going to destroy everything, everywhere, every man and woman and animal. They're going to be gone. I bet your Sunday school teachers never taught you that part too, didn't dwell on that part too long, huh? With that story, we should have been asking, what kind of a God would destroy all the world? Well, like the story of Isaac, this story was written in a time where there were all kinds of stories people told about God's getting mad and destroying humanity because people understood if you make the gods mad, you're toast, right? Every now and then the gods needed to clear the deck and start over. And so a story of a God getting mad and destroying the earth, it wasn't all that unusual. But there's a little detail in this story as well, that's easy to miss. You see, this story was different from the stories of the other gods. This God saved a family. This God saved animals. This God, once the flood was over, the Bible tells us even felt sorry for what had happened. And says it's never, ever going to happen again. And that's why we have that rainbow. It's a sign of the promise God made to never do anything so terrible again. This is not how all the other flood stories about all the other gods ended. In the other stories, the gods were angry and everybody dies and the gods are satisfied. But this God is different. This God is